My opponent's claim is that self-driving cars would have significant advantages over driver-controlled vehicles. His three secondary claims are: first, human drivers have inescapable problems that cause them to be inherently dangerous. Self-driving cars can improve traffic. And three, self-driving cars are beneficial to public transportation. His argument here is flawed with little evidence and broad generalizations and assumptions made to support his secondary claims. First of all, on his first secondary claim, he states that humans are too dangerous because we have numerous unsolvable problems. With this claim, though, he fails to give proper sustenance to his claim, because he has statistics and chooses to make wild assumptions based off of those. And one of the points that he makes on how drivers are influenced by drugs and alcohol, the opponent gives statistical data without proper citation. He also states on the point that humans having a variance in skill level is actually untrue, because all drivers must have a similar skill level because they must pass the driving test, which is written and practical before receiving their license. On his second claim, he states that self-driving cars have the possibility of improving traffic. In one of his evidence pieces, it's a study on how self-driving cars can achieve optimal traffic. And that study is from 2006, more than 10 years ago. New data takes into account ride-sharing services and the way that we live today. Stated by Lou Fulton, Director of STEPS program at the UC Davis Institute of Technology, we are especially concerned about zero-occupant vehicles that can happen with automated vehicles. Companies are using these vehicles to pick up packages, but that can increase traffic by multiplying the amount of cars that are on the road. With all of his points, though, to support this claim, they're all studies, largely hypothetical examples. In fact, he doesn't have any real evidence to state how does the self-driving cars actually work, or how they're built to help support, to help improve traffic. And on his third claim, he states that self-driving cars are beneficial to public transportation. Self-driving cars, though, cannot improve public transportation. There's a number of safety issues that prevent them from being successful in this field. First of all, cars are can be under the influence of hackers or bad programming that can cause issues, accidents, or unnecessary stops. In 2015, two hackers, Charlie Miller and Chris Valsek, took control of a Jeep Cherokee and was able to cut off the transmission. Chrysler, after that, recalled 1.4 million vehicles to install hijacking software shortly after. The second support for my counterclaim is that self-driving cars cannot drive if there's no clear path, if there's no paved roads, because it's not getting any data from the sensors, or the data from the sensors is misinterpreted. The Tesla crash that my opponent stated was a result of the car's sensors unable to tell the difference between the bright sky and a large white truck that was passing in front of the car. Also, signs in construction areas are marked for humans rather than for self-driving car sensors. Jerry Oldman, a research engineer specializing in work zones at the Texas A&M Transportation Institute, states that work zones are so dynamic, so site-specific, in a lot of cases, that it's really difficult to write code to tell the vehicle, when you see this, do this. And lastly, third, cars do not understand or have knowledge of human customs and human culture. Phil Koopman of the Carnegie Mellon University states that self-driving cars haven't been truly tested in unique environments like out on the road, but instead with simulations inside of a computer. For instance, in different parts of the country, you're not able to turn right on red. The car would not have this information built in if it was in a different state. And my opponent also mentioned that self-driving cars only work when it's connected to the internet and it has updated maps. On the basis of my refutation here, the advocate's argument that self-driving cars have significant advantages is inherently flawed, and needs more evidence to back up his claim. Thank you.
Right, the structural stuff's fine. There's a good preview, except that you do stop the numerical signposting after you list the first of the supporting points. So that was a little bit confusing, but I could follow what was being said. And you did signpost it in the body of the speech, which is okay. On your first point, you suggest that the advocate has really got a lack of information that supports the conclusion. And I'm not exactly sure that the criticism that you're making here is all that important. I mean, the notion that drugs and alcohol are a problem, although the advocate didn't cite a specific citation, I think that most people are probably aware that that is a substantial problem. It wouldn't have been difficult for them to do. I think the notion that accidents are primarily a result of those kinds of things suggests that the alternative is not necessarily to replace drivers, but to make sure those kinds of drivers are appropriately removed from the road, as opposed to replacing all drivers in totality. When you talk about us all having the same skill levels, because we all pass the same test. I think that's probably even weaker than the advocate's argument on that point. I think you're asking us to believe something that probably is intuitively not correct. Most people are going to sit there and say, I know I'm a better driver than that person, or I don't like driving at all and it freaks me out every time I'm out on the road doing those kinds of things. So I appreciate the effort to make an argument there, but it doesn't do much. It feels a little underwhelming. I thought your better arguments had to do with the second issue. For instance, the traffic issue is largely dependent upon the infrastructure that's available for these self-driving cars, and there's a good argument to be made that such an infrastructure doesn't exist now, and I think the follow-up argument needs to be that it's going to take forever to get to that particular point. And you've got some examples about a lack of maps, or they don't have the indicators, that kind of thing. I think that's the idea that it's all hypothetical is also a good point that's being made. I do think that there is some research that also shows that these self-driving cars in the experimental process have not always been successful, that there have been issues. And the other thing is, I think that they're largely dependent on removing the human component to get these advantages. And until all cars are self-driving cars, I'm not sure that you're going to get this outcome. And I think maybe that's something that you kind of skip over there. I thought your three responses on the third point are good responses. I don't know that they apply to the public transportation issue, but they are good general responses to the argument. The hacker thing gives us a risk to be concerned about, and I like the fact that you documented an example and showed that it had an effect on 1.4 million vehicles. That's pretty substantive in comparison to whatever hypothetical the advocate is presenting, and I think you want to challenge that a little bit more on what their research is based on. It's a computer simulation rather than real experience. The example about the Tesla crash, it's a difficulty in detecting the difference between the sky and the color of a truck that happens to be passing by. Again, this is one of those things that I'm sure that the advocate would say technology is going to solve all those things. This is a place where I think what you need is a good general argument on how technology, we can't be overly dependent on it. There are always problems like bugs in the system, or things that we didn't think of. I mean, a lot of things are great, but isn't technology great until it doesn't work? I think almost all of us, we love our computers when they're functioning, and then when they freeze, we want to scream. Or, there's some bug in the system and it gives us an error that we don't know anything about. And we want to go, what the heck is going on here? And I don't think it would be hard to find a lot of people who've suggested when you become overly dependent on technology, there are all kinds of problems that crop up as a result. So I think that that would have been maybe a good way to supplement that argument. Here I am talking too long again.